Voice of FinTech.
Hello and welcome to Voice of FinTech MENA Middle East and North Africa series. In this series you will hear inspirational stories of entrepreneurs, corporate innovators, investors and ecosystem hub leaders from the Middle East and North Africa. My name is Rudy Falad, I'm the founder of the Voice of FinTech podcast. This episode is hosted by Dorra.
Welcome to the Voice of FinTech, where we explore the most exciting trends and innovation in financial technology. I'm your host, Dorra Mahbouli, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Martin Della Chiesa, co-CEO of Scaleit. Scaleit is a cutting-edge fintech core banking solutions provider, empowering banks and financial institutions to modernize their digital offerings with a focus on agility and scalability. In today's episode, we will be diving into Scaleit's MENA expansion strategy, their unique use cases, challenges in scaling digital banking in the region, and the evolving regulatory landscape. So Martin, thank you for joining us today. I'm very happy to welcome you. So to start, can you tell us more about Scaleit's vision and mission, and mostly how did the company come to a focus on transforming digital banking for incumbent banks?
Hi, Dora. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I'm very glad to be there and sharing our story and vision for African banking technologies. So, look, at Scaleit, our vision is that banking technology doesn't have to be as expensive and slow as it is today. Very simply, overall, globally, more than 60 billion are spent in core banking related assets. And yet it takes years to launch new products, and it costs dozens of millions to change any small bits of it. So we are on a mission since 2015 to redefine the game of banking technology to enable fintechs and banks not only to launch new digital offerings, but also to transform and modernize what they do for the best.
Okay, Martin, this is very challenging.
Yeah.
Yes, tell me.
You. Yeah, on your second question, what is interesting is that beyond the fact that we are a Paris-based team mostly, we were in fact commercially and product-wise born in Africa. And the reason for that is probably because the Silicon Valley of banking is in Africa and that it's continuing to be the case. So we are very proud to be born in Africa, to scale our operations in Africa, and having exported all of that know-how towards Europe too.
Amazing. So I'm really inspired by the Scaleit vision and mission and how did it start. But I would like to ask you, Martin, more about your journey with Scaleit. Since becoming co-CEO, how you are driving growth actually in the market, especially in MENA, North Africa, let's say, and Africa especially. What would make you actually excited about this market and especially for digital banking transformation part?
Yes, thank you for your question, Nora. So I've been personally involved in the financial services space for more than 12 years. Back in 2020, I was working for a New York-based growth equity fund where we had this thesis that digital banking will become more and more of a thing globally, including Africa, of course, and that there had two possibilities, either like starting digital banking activities or funding them, but also that the need for modern technological backbone will be a game-changing enabler to support that vision. And so that's how we came across that company that was called TagPay at the time. That was its interesting asset, and that we ended up buying, rebranding into Scaleit. And so I've been following up on that journey since then as a board member before becoming the co-CEO together with Hervé, the co-founder. So the idea really came to us that there was a need for changing the game of IT, and that with everything that was going on in Africa, on a continent where there are more than 400 million people, where the speed at which banking adoption was spreading across the country, the opportunity to sell technological products onto that continent was just massive. So what we are doing operationally on the ground is really going after either on our own to the banks and the fintechs to support them by selling technology and SaaS as a service to them, but also partnering with third parties, whether they are integrators, whether they are consultants, whether they are other software as a service providers, to build an ecosystem of transformers and be at the cornerstone of it.
Amazing, Martin. So I see it's really an inspiring journey. And you just talked about banking adoption. So in North Africa and mainly in MENA, which sometimes it's even different when we talk about MENA, Africa, or North Africa, each region or sub-region have a unique financial and cultural landscape, even regarding doing business or implementing projects. So besides the regular challenges that like any company would face, what were your main challenges within this region that you faced while doing business, and how Scale addressed them? Especially that you said that you work within an ecosystem with consultants and other type of partners.
Yes, absolutely. I think it boils down to three aspects that I believe are interesting. The first one is that from a business standpoint in Africa, when you are selling technology in the banking space, the customers you are serving have this massive challenge themselves, which is to absorb just massive growth. Comparing with what we are doing in Europe, where the market is very mature, on average, people have probably 1.2, 1.3 bank accounts per capita. In Africa, it's not the case. We were just part of that race to banking rate adoption acceleration, and that creates enormous pressure in terms of our ability collectively to absorb growth in a context where local infrastructure is just not ready. So we rely as a software as a service on our own cloud-based infrastructure, and just we need to be up to that game to absorb massive adoption trend. So I think that's one very important aspect, which is that we are in a growth game. Local infrastructure is relatively low, and therefore we need to up our game from a cloud infrastructure standpoint to be ready to absorb that growth. Secondly, like most of the branches for the banks are located in the cities. If you talk about Mauritania, for instance, probably 80% of the banking branches are located into the two cities of the countries, Nouakchott as well as Nouadhibou. But the reality is that close to 80% of the population doesn't live in the cities. Therefore, from a technological standpoint, the challenge is not how you are going to transform digital banking onto the branches, but how you are going to provide to the banks the tools for their users, wherever they are on the countryside, to have an access to financial services. So the game is really about providing access to populations that are remote from the cities. And that point is very exciting and challenging. And the last point is quite interesting as well. It's about languages. We operate in countries where, for various reasons, there are multiple languages at place. And all of those ethnies and populations need to be able to opt in for the language that they like the most. And having a highly configurable SaaS product for the language to be easily changed depending on the customer preferences was an absolute necessity for us that we had to cope with at the beginning. And that makes it very interesting from a cultural perspective as well, to have that many languages configured onto our SaaS platform.
Okay, very clear, Martin. I like the fact that you are into detail. So even the languages are taken into account, because it's so important to have access to financial, let's say, between brackets accounts, but it needs to be actually ready to use. So language is very important. You talked also about local readiness and also the financial inclusion part that is important. However, you are mainly focused on the cloud part, the technical part. So it's more on the tech fin part, let's say. And what about the regulation, which sometimes often in those areas, mainly different from Europe, where everything is somehow established. There is a common regulation with open banking, the SP2, and so on. So regulation often plays a role, a critical role in the adoption of the fintech solutions, maybe not through your solutions directly, but maybe through your partners. How has Scale navigated this environment in this local market? And are there any specific regulatory hurdles maybe you've encountered, or it's mainly your partners that would deal with that?
Yes, so that's a very interesting point as well. Although we are a technology provider, obviously, we operate into a highly regulated space. And as you said, Africa is probably not at the same level as Europe in terms of the density of regulation. And therefore, where in Europe, really, as you said, regulatory pressure in terms of doing things a certain way in a given timeline can be a huge acceleration for modern SaaS adoption. It's a bit less the case in Africa, just because the room to maneuver historically was just higher. It's changing progressively. We are seeing more and more regulation tightening across Africa, that with regulation that are also inspired by what has happened across Europe with DSP2 and those kinds of European-led inspired regulations. So that's changing in ecosystems and terms that we know relatively well. So that was never really a big issue for us. What we see as a trend that is quite interesting, in my opinion, is really like the push from central banks, mostly in the French-speaking countries, for the interoperability to be in place. For a long time, banks and digital banks have been operating in closed loops. So very easy to transfer money within a bank type of customer base. But whenever transacting between different banks, the interbanking infrastructure are not at the level where we have SEPA, for instance, across Europe. And the trend for adoption of interoperability is just accelerating, and that creates a lot of challenges and interesting opportunities for us to help our customers to cope with those new expectations in terms of facilitating the interbanking connectivity across the continent. That's something we see more and more.
Yes, true. Okay, so now let's focus on Scale It business, let's say. Let's talk about some use cases in this region. So Scale It worked with MCI, Mauritania, to launch their digital bank project. Can you walk us through this project and highlight what made it successful, what were the challenges, and what you are proud of with this project?
2 months ago, for the Independence Day, and I was just amazed by what happened in this country. In a 5 million population country, I will give you just one number. 80% of the money supply that is there is moving digitally. Probably 5 years ago, it was close to zero. So the speed at which the adoption of digital banking has exploded just blew my mind. And we were lucky enough to be part of that journey and a big catalyst of it. So when the BMCI management came knocking on our door in 2021, they said, look, the country needs digital banking. Branches are not suited for most of the population. Branches are based in the cities. The population is not only based in the cities, 80% of it is outside of the cities. We have a very young population. 64% of our population is less than 24 years old. And the demand for digital products is just massive and totally untapped by the traditional banking space. So if we really want to grasp and capture that banking rate adoption trend, we need to do something differently. Yes, we are the leading traditional bank there. We are very proud and very happy about it. We are serving the biggest companies in the country. But if we want to be a retail bank and equip the population with digital financial services products, we need to do something different. And in 4 months together, we were able to launch Masrafi, a brand new digital bank. And then I think nobody expected that to grow at that pace. I think today they have more than 800,000 customers, which is just massive. And they are growing at a pace that even the CEO was not expecting, given the trend at which it's moving. They've done an incredible job at scaling their distribution networks, changing from having 47 branches into having 700 point of sale across the countries. I think that close to 75% of the overall BMCI bank are Masrafi customers. So the scale of the operations today is just massive. And I think the way they achieved that is probably threefold. One, they knew that they couldn't use legacy IT they had for the big bank. The time to market would have been probably 3x. The capex needed probably 10x. And the product fit from a digital perspective would just not have been what it was. I think that's one. Two, they went fast. Time matters. Every month that passes were customer acquisition that they were not doing and that could go to competition. Third, they just nailed the build of their ecosystem, getting billing integrations with merchants, getting a network of merchants involved, getting point of sales with distributors for their product. They just nailed the ecosystem construction. And last but not least, their marketing approach in terms of the terrain, combining Instagram campaigns with, having a bus going through the entire country to go about and attracting customers into their lovable products was just operating at a level of excellence in starting a business like that I never saw in any country before.
Wow, this is very inspiring, Martin. And I think for sure that the mindset behind this and the willingness of the board behind and the directors is playing a major role to be a success. And thanks to the partnership with Scale It, I think it made it more secure and more smooth, let's say, into implementation. So this was in Mauritania. And yes, I agree with you. This market is really so quick, either in the finance or telco kind of industries. But if we try to see other type of use cases in another country, for example, DRC, so Congo, you have another interesting use case to tell us more about, which is Trust Merchant Bank. Are there any strategies or lessons that are different maybe or more country related or environment related with that collaboration and that could help actually other banks to get inspired by this use case for their digital transformation?
Yes, absolutely. I think there are two main comments that I would make related to our Trust Merchant Bank use case. The first one is that they started early. It was, in fact, the first customer we onboarded on our core banking platform back in 2015. So very early on, they saw the threat of the telcos, and they just didn't wait. And I think that's a lesson for me from a business manager standpoint, which is when you see the market moving and when you see threats coming in, you need to act fast and now. And I think that's what they've done, and that helped them really scale up their business at a time where they had the early move advantage, and that helped them a lot. So I think that's one aspect that I wanted to touch on. And second, focus matters. And starting a digital bank business is a science. I don't think you can do it by going with a broad approach. Okay, I'm going all in mass market. That's very hard to scale. It's very expensive to achieve. So what they've done is they replied to, I think, an RFP from the Ministry of Finance at the time, or one of the government-led bodies. And it was about paying the salaries of the government employees. And what they've just done is build the best digital banking products to do just that. And by doing that, they acquired more than 200,000 government employees as customers, 270,000, in fact, to be precise. And they just scaled that base up by building loyalty of those government employees and attracting other customers on top of it. So I think for all of the entrepreneurs that we are, the initial focus, in my view, is extremely important. You need an angle. You can't just go broadly about an opportunity. You need to narrow down your market opportunity and be the best at it.
Okay, so market opportunity is important. And earlier you were talking about local readiness. You were talking about the problematic of financial access and financial inclusion, which remain an issue. So you've already, let's say, talked about it, but how scale it in a more concrete way is helping banks through their offers to make it more accessible, more inclusive to their communities? Do you have any examples of what's happening potentially in Morocco or on other type of areas that you're supporting?
Yes, I think everywhere we operate in Africa, and that's also true across Europe, in fact, our mission is to make financial services more accessible. That includes, obviously, financial inclusion, providing financial services to the broader amount of people as possible, but it's also about making the access to financial services simpler. And the reason I'm saying that is, if you think about what we are doing with Konga in Nigeria, Konga is one of the biggest marketplace on the continent. I think it's the fourth one in terms of traffic. They have something like 3 million customers. And we work with them to support their Konga Pay business, which is an equivalent of Amazon Pay. And I think what's interesting there is that although it's not stricto sensu financial inclusion, what Konga is doing with Konga Pay is just making the financial services easier to access for the population because it's connected to a marketplace. And that's what we call embedded finance. And embedded finance is just about providing a higher proximity between people buying things and consuming services and financial services. So that's one example. On the purer, let's say, banking side, everything we do in Africa and everything we do in Europe as well is about dropping the unit cost of IT per user. Not because we are delivering a cheap service, that's not what we are doing, but because we are leveraging economies of scale from the SaaS space to deliver a product to our customers. And because we are delivering a product, we are diminishing drastically the cost of IT. And because we are diminishing the cost of IT while increasing the quality of IT, we are enabling our customers to ship better products to a broader range of people. We are changing the economic curve of banking in Africa. And because we are doing that, more people have access to it. And secondly, because we have a configurable product that is by essence digital, it enables our customers to build products that have a broader reach by itself. When I was talking earlier about a mobile-centric product, a digital-centric product, it just destroys the barriers that existed in the past, which is that to have access to financial services, you need to show up into a branch. And by manufacturing products that remove the link you need between banking and the actual bank is what transforms financial inclusion, because you can just ship products towards phones. If you take the example of Mauritania, I think the penetration rate of SIM cards is probably 100%. The penetration rate of smartphones is probably 30%. The penetration rate of internet is 40%. And historically, the banking penetration rate was probably half that. And we doubled banking rate adoption in Mauritania just because we leverage internet and SIM cards to make sure that people could have access to financial services.
Yes. So what you're saying is the markets are evolving and the environment are being even more beneficial, let's say, to work towards these changes and these digital transformation parts. And as you are expanding, I understand that you are managing the economy scale, which is very interesting to make it more affordable to any kind of client in the sector to work with Scale It, let's say. But how do you manage as a corporation to balance between tailored or personalized solution, let's say, in some local markets, while maintaining at the same time your scalability as a company even though you have some modularity within your platform, some modules and so on, but still you need to be scalable and while having a rapid growth. So how you are managing this equation?
That's an excellent question. To give you a fact, we have 30 customers globally, and we serve those 30 customers with the same code base. That's about the scale. You could be in a mode where you have as many products as you have of customers. That's the opposite of scale. So with the same product, the same code base, we are serving all of our customers, and all of them are using the same version of the software at the same time. So every 2 months we update our software. That's key part of our value prop of continuous delivery. Continuously we improve our product, we augment it, we change it, we edit it, we make it better, and everybody's using the same version. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody is leveraging the same functionalities. It can be used by 10 customers and not by the next 10 ones, but all of it may be available if they were needed it, the same functionalities. So I think that's one. So the question is like, how do we achieve that outcome? The answer to that question is mostly configurability. Instead of building and hard coding a business rule a certain way, we have a very strong product team that is going to abstract the need and translate it into a configurable asset so that without coding, you can change the behavior of a functionality to serve different use cases with the same code base. That's what we are doing. Now, there is always a need for localization, obviously. And for that, we are doing two things. What I would say is that most of the localization problem is related towards the front end, so the customer experience by itself, the mobile application. And in most cases, our customers start with our own application. And once they get to a perfect understanding in terms of what their customers want, they go about building their own application, leveraging our backend API, and they become autonomous in the localization of their customer experience. And in order to do that, they can leverage a partner of ours, for instance, the Mobi Blanc integration team that has worked with us in Mauritania. They could do it themselves. The IT team will be involved and just go about doing it, or seek for advice with us, but they would be responsible for it in terms of delivery. That's one aspect. And the second one is about what we call our low-code, no-code orchestration strategy, where our customers can go about specifying the use cases themselves without having to code. And that creates a very clear frontier between what Scale.it is about from a product standpoint and what the customers will implement themselves in terms of the use cases. And by doing that, we serve the purpose of localizing the product and the needs in the customer's context while protecting the scalability and the integrity of our product.
Amazing. I like how the answer was very structured, and I understand very well how you could manage this scalability, which makes also what I like is that the client, let's say, is really involved in the process. So there is no doubt that their needs would be satisfied since they are part of the process, actually. I like that. Okay, so if we think about the next few years, let's say, what would be the goals of Scale.it in this specific region, let's say? Are there any specific partnerships or projects in the pipeline that you would share with us?
Yes, so that won't be a surprise to you, but we are on a mission to scale our operations in Europe and Africa. We have big ambitions for Africa. We operate broadly, let's say, in Africa, and we would be happy to execute on any projects across the continent. But we do have some regions where we believe we have an edge to accelerate. You said it, we are very strong in Mauritania, and we want to do more there. We have customers in Burundi. We have some customers in Ivory Coast also where we want to accelerate. We are starting operations as well in Senegal, where I believe there is a lot of opportunity for digital transformation. So we are ramping up our team on the ground. We've hired professionals to support our growth there. particular, a guy that our customers will be happy to have on board, Eli Zogaib. We was an executive of many software editors in the past, so he will be our senior executive there, based in Ivory Coast, in Abidjan. So we have big ambitions there. I think Mali is a massive country from a banking standpoint that is opening up from a variety of perspective, and that will create opportunity for us. We have big ambitions there as well. From my perspective, the African banking space is entering into super interesting transformation across Africa, and that goes beyond the trend that I exposed in terms of growth from an end market standpoint, but the banking landscape is changing. The French banks are progressively retrieving from Africa. BNP Paribas did it 10 years ago. BPC did it 5 years ago. Société Générale is doing it now. And that opens up a huge amount of opportunities for the Moroccan banks. TJI, BMC, they are all going after expansion strategy towards the south. Same thing coming from the south to the north, like KCB and the like, coming from Kenya, where we have somebody on the ground, Nairobi as well, are going aggressively after the banking market. That creates also some consolidation pressure from Atlantic, from Vista. And I think that's just a massive opportunity for us to support those players onto their development plans. We can be helpful for them to launch new products very quickly and grasp market share at a rapid pace. But we are going to be, I think, more and more a key partner for them to transform. I think there is an issue across Africa in terms of the economic balance of the banking model. I think the banks have waited for too long to fight against the telcos, and I think that needs to change relatively quickly. The banks cannot let the telcos go after the mass market forever. I don't think that's sustainable. I think that's going to change. And the way to do that is to launch quickly digital banking offerings, and I think we are the right solution to do that. Beyond that, when you look at the numbers, across Africa, the cost-to-income ratio, so the division between cost and revenue, on average is at 8. Globally, it's more in the zip code of 60, 65, which means that the margins, paradoxically, are relatively low. And the reason for it is that the market has just started to consolidate. The revenue opportunity associated with the retail market is just at its infancy. And the fixed IT costs are just too high to support that growth. And I think there is a massive opportunity to bring down the cost-to-income ratio of the continent to lower levels super quickly. And the way to do that is scale it.
To scale it. Actually, Martin, finally, there are some banks which are ready and conscious about what all you have explained, and they are ready to start their journey towards digital transformation. So what advice you would give to these banks? From where to start? What are the top factors they should prioritize maybe to succeed, or even to start first before even succeeding?
I think the biggest enemy in our space is status quo, because perception of risk related to IT is historically very high. And so the excuses for doing nothing are numerous. So what C-levels have to fight against is status quo. So the only piece of advice that I have is just get started. And just get started with things that are achievable with short time to market. Move away from 5-year transformation plan. Just go about launching a digital banking product within 6 months. That's achievable. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it works out, that's a massive win commercially. And then from there, what I see, and that is more and more interesting, is that some of our customers start to say, look, we started as a speedboat with you, almost as a sideshow. Let's get started with a speedboat. Let's get the digital bank running. And now we have more customers on the speedboat than we have on the initial boat. And then the question becomes like, who is in the sidecar? Is it like the legacy system, or is it the digital bank with Scale It? And the lines between those two are going to be more and more blurred to a point where the digital banks are going to become, in my mind, the central technological backbone for the overall banks. But probably our customers, when they were getting started, they were not thinking about that. They just were thinking about doing something to fight against the telcos, get market share, get customers in the door. But by moving, they just got where they are. And I think there was one quote that was said by Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, a few months ago, which is that action manufactures information. So if you want to de-risk your project, just go and move.
I agree 100%. And the mindset part, I think it plays a big role within this start. So thank you very much, Martin. I have a very last question. What would be the best way to approach you, to contact you in order to have, for example, a demo or to start even talking about a project? Which way is the best to contact you?
Absolutely. So the first answer is that my personal email is open to anyone. So I would be happy to speak to CEOs or whoever directly at martin.com, or in a bit of a more, let's say, classical way. We do have a contact form on our website, and be sure that our marketing team is monitoring that very closely.
Okay, Martin, so I leave you maybe last thing to say, maybe just after my closing. So thank you so much for joining us on the Voice of FinTech today and sharing your insights on Scale's journey and the MENA, let's say, North African, mostly African expansion. I've personally learned a lot. I was really happy to host you. It's inspiring to see how Scale is driving digital transformation in the sector, and I'm sure that our listeners will gain a valuable perspective from this discussion. Best of luck with your continued work and beyond, and we hope to have you back soon, maybe in another podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. That's going to be with pleasure that I will participate to another episode when the time is right. We are very proud to support the growth in our team is committed to providing access to financial services with a higher quality. And that's what we are going to keep doing for the next decades.
Thank you so much, Martin.
Thank you for listening to Voice of FinTech podcast. If you haven't already, check out also voiceoffintech.com, where you will find all the episodes and additional resources related to the podcast. You can also subscribe to Voice of FinTech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or any other podcast app that you like. If you have any suggestions on the topics or guests, or how to make this podcast better for you, please email us at info@voiceoffintech.com. Happy to hear from you. Thank you.